Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 56 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Morning, Tino.
It's Saturday morning, 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. Today we are going to review our shortstop redraft rankings, top 16, and we'll go over a little dynasty as well, same format as we've done for the previous positions. You got any coffee stories before we get started?
It's a very Africa-centric day. I brewed Kenya this morning when I got up, and then I stopped and got a cup of Ethiopia at Passenger after I took Laura to work. So
Nice.
covering my bases there in that part of the world. Both of them are very, very good.
Nice. I picked up some more Guatemala El Injerto, which has become my kind of go-to Central American. And I guess the only thing I can say is it's always shocking to go from a pea berry to a big Central American bean. Just the visual of it is pretty interesting. It's like it's a different plant almost. But a great cup of coffee. That's all I got. Let's dig in. I think it's time.
Okay. All right.
Your top redraft shortstop for 2023 is?
Trey Turner.
Okay.
Boring.
Not necessarily. And how many shortstops do you have in your first tier?
Just one.
Okay. So it's just Turner.
Yeah.
Sweet. What is it about Turner? I think we all know who Trey Turner is in a lot of ways. I guess the question is, he's 29. Are his steals going to change because of age, because of rules? Because that is a lot of why we value him. And then what do you think happens with Trey Turner going to Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I mean, I do think we've seen his peak season. Age, he is a 5 category contributor, and I think that's one of the reasons why he cements himself so firmly at the top of this position, along with his track record. But I think his speed is a tool that really drives his profile. So we know that as fast as he is, as he continues to age, it's gonna start to erode a little bit. I don't see any signs that he is there. He's still in the 90th percentile on home to first, 99th percentile in sprint speed. So, yeah, I mean, we saw him reach a little bit more than he's ever done in the past. We've seen him swing and miss a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think we talked in a previous episode, was there any pressing there, knowing he was going into his free agency? There are those that believe when you sign that deal that there's maybe some let up or some pressure. I think with him, I could see maybe the opposite. He's kind of established, he's back closer to home. He might just kind of let go and be more free. But again, that's narrative. So yeah, he just, when I said it was boring, I just think he's been at top of this position for several years now. So I don't think it's not very clever to pick the incumbent, but I just didn't see anything. Again, he's contributes across all 5 categories. He led all major leagues last year in infield hits, which really, buoys his batting average. So I wonder where they're going to hit him in that lineup, but either way, it's in the top 2 or 3, no matter what they do. So I don't think that really impacts. It's just a matter of whether you're going to get a few more runs or a few more RBIs.
Right. I agree with all that. As you probably have surmised at this point, Trey Turner is my number 2. Bobby Witt Jr. is my number 1. I think there are, when you look at some of the statistics and metrics between the two, there are some pretty startling similarities in places between those two. I think that they both offer a ton of speed and a ton of power. But you've got, they have very similar, well, not too similar, but walk and K rates. Bobby Witt Jr.'s is worse on both, but he's also 22 years old and just learning. They've got a very similar O swing, 37.3 for Witt and 36.4 for Turner. They've got a very similar zone contact, 85.6 for Witt, 85.9 for Turner. Turner's swinging strike rate's a little higher. Their average EV is within 1 mile per hour of one another. So there's a lot of similarities. Witt does hit the ball in the air a lot more than Turner does. but I see in Bobby Witt Jr. In a lot of ways a younger version of Trey Turner, and I think that if he's able to hit more line drives next year, especially in that big park, I actually think he passes Trey Turner in home runs and steals. He already did in steals last year. They had almost the same home runs, 20 to 21. But I think we see his runs and RBIs go up as he matures as a hitter. So I do think Trey Turner going to Philadelphia is a great fit. I foresee him probably scoring more than 101 runs. I don't know that he gets 100 RBIs again. I think that Dodgers lineup was more balanced. Philadelphia certainly has a great lineup. As you stated last pod, hitting the ball out to left in LA is a pretty good deal. So I don't know that he gets a big park boost power wise in Philadelphia. I just think the world of Bobby Witt Jr. I think that there are a lot of things about him that you can pick apart. In 22, his OBP was under 300. His OPS was 722. But across the board, how hard he hit the ball, how fast he is, the fact that he did put up 20 home runs and 30 steals in a season where he didn't hit the ball all that well, to me, I think is a huge sign for the future. So Witt is one for me. Would I take him one in a redraft if I had both of them available to me? Absolutely, I would. But I also am not going to take Trey Turner at one if that was me. So it's not me seeing Turner as I think any worse of a player than anybody else does. I just think that much of Witt. I also have Francisco Lindor in this tier. I have those three together in tier one. Real quickly with Lindor, he's the same. He's 100 runs, 100 RBIs, but he hit for a little more power and had a little less speed last year. But I think Turner and Lindor are the safe ones in this tier. Again, Witt is the kind of the wild card, but he's my one.
What is your evaluation for saying that how impressed you were with how Witt hit the ball? Are you looking at max EV, or is it just his age? Is it the fact that he's in his 50 or 60 percentile and he's so young that's enough for you?
Yep, I think it's age. So I should have prefaced this with, I recite all these numbers. I've got them all in a spreadsheet. I think they're all important and help us find players that we think are going to get better or going to get worse. But I'm starting to, just from a personal scouting standpoint, I really do value pedigree. And I've always been that way, but even more so. I value pedigree. I value what I see with my own eyes. I value what I watch on both in games and what I watched on film in terms of evaluating swings and whatnot. And with Witt, in my mind, we can pick apart some of the things that he did wrong last year numerically. But he's a ball player in a way that is, I think, very elite. And, he and Julio have been grouped together for a reason. And there are some of Julio's numbers, specifically some of his, his walk rate and other things that you can pick apart if you really want to. But you've got to remember, these guys are 22. Witt has 3 more years probably before he actually peaks physically, right? So again, if 20 homers, 30 steals, 82 runs, and 80 RBIs were the counting stats that were the baseline for his rookie year before he had an idea of what he was doing at the plate, to me, that screams talent. And that screams talent on the upswing. But yeah, I trust my eyes a lot more than I did previously. And it's because we've all put the work in to get better at what we see. And I'm using numbers less to give me, 80% of the evaluation and more to understand or to I guess to supplement what it is that I've scouted, more so than to be the actual scouting.
Fair enough.
I know that you're lower on Witt. What is it about Witt that has you less enthusiastic, I guess, is a fair question.
I have him as my number 4 shortstop, so I would not say I'm low on him.
Okay. I would. I guess I'm asking you, so you have him at 4 versus 1. What keeps him from being Trey Turner next year? That's a better way to put it.
I thought this was a redraft discussion.
It is, but that's why.
Okay. So I don't care about 2024 for this discussion.
No, I'm talking about 23.
Because I think Trey would be is going to be a much better asset for this year.
Is
I
there
have him as a $44 player, and Witt is down at 32, so it's really not close.
right? But I guess what I'm asking is there a skill, or is there a tool, or is there a statistic that you've cited that reduces or that gives him that valuation in your mind?
Yeah, so I think batting average would be a big one. It's one of the 5 categories. I have Trey at 285 and Witt at 263. And I think as you outline the power and speed, they might be a lot closer there. And then I also really value for the counting categories, Phillies and Royals. I think I really prefer the Phillies there.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, I think I understand the arc of what you're saying in his development, that he might overtake Turner in the next couple of years, which makes perfect sense, right? Because he's 22 and Trey's 29. So got one guy going into his mid 20s and the other guy going into, his early 30s. So it makes perfect sense to me.
right.
But for this year, I think, yeah, Trey is I project him to be the number one shortstop for this exercise.
Got it. Part of one of the reasons why I expect his Bobby Witt Jr.'s runs and RBIs to go up is because I believe in that offense. You got, as I've stated previously, I believe in Pasquantino, and I think he's going to get a lot better. Obviously, MJ Melendez is 24 years old. He's going to get a lot better. I think their offense as a whole is going to get better. This isn't based on anything other than just kind of looking at some of Witt's statistics and thinking about the way what Kansas City teaches and preaches. I think he's going to hit more line drives this year. It's not based on anything concrete. This is nothing that I've read. My assumption is that they're going to try to take advantage of his speed more, and specifically with some of the shift rules. Not that he was shifted in the way a left-hander would, but I expect him to be a faster player. I think he could hit 10 to 15 triples this year, right? I expect him to hit more line drives, and he's such a skilled player that's the kind of thing you can simply teach in the offseason and have him come out as a different player next year. I would also say, this is just my own evaluation. When I look at Philadelphia's lineup and the addition of Trey Turner, I understand that they've had a good offense historically, but I don't love, from five through 9 is Castellanos, Derek Hall, Alec Bohm, Bryson Stott, Brandon Marsh. And behind him is Schwarber, Hoskins, and Realmuto. So you've got 2 all or nothing hitters behind him. And then Realmuto, who's a very kind of solid hitter across the board. But you're counting on a lot of those players taking a step, right, at a bit of an older age for Philly to really be a great offense. And so I do think that we could see a slight reduction in Turner's counting stats because he left the Dodgers and came to Philadelphia. That's not to say Turner isn't deserving of being ranked 1. I think that's probably the rational rank. It's just my love for Witt. So where do you have Lindor? I assume 3?
I have Francisco at 6.
Oh, you do? Who's your number 3?
Bo Bichette.
Okay. Let's talk about him a little bit. He's at the beginning of my next tier at 4. We all talked about Bichette as a first rounder going into 22. What's changed in terms of valuing him as a first rounder now, and what puts him at 3 for you?
Yeah, I think similar to Turner. I mean, he's a 5-category contributor. Really solid lineup spot. And I think as one of the things I've come to appreciate doing these evaluations is just looking at players that really have more of a balanced profile. And I think he does provide that. He chases a lot, but he swings a lot as well. He makes a lot of contact. So I have him for 22 home runs and 16 steals. His ISO puts him in the top 8 at the position in terms of isolated power. So, he has a lot of doubles and things like that. He does go the opposite way quite a bit. So we may have seen his best home run season already, but I think he's got enough power and he's enough bats a ball where, you know, he's not going to hit for no power at all.
Right.
So, you know, and I think there's a lot of back and forth on his speed. You know, he's a middling runner in terms of the metrics we use to evaluate speed, and his success rate on the base paths has also been up and down, both in the minors in his first couple of years. He was, I think, 26 of 27 2 years ago. And then last year he was caught, I think, 6 or 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of mirrored what we saw in the minors. So, but we also have a rule change where, you know, we might see more aggressive and more opportunities on the bases. So a lot of different arrows pointing different ways, but I think as a total package, he's, you know, 24 with his contact ability and all around skills. I think he's kind of puts him above some of the guys below, I think.
Right. He's such a puzzling player, right?
Yeah.
And I think that so much of what, at least when he started really cold last year, so much of what we thought about him was that his production is going to be a bit of a roller coaster, and that a lot of it is not luck based, but he makes so much, he swings at crazy pitches, right? And he's such a free swinger, yet he hits the ball, you know, incredibly hard all the time. And I do wonder, I know that I don't know the exact change in Toronto's outfield dimensions, but I know that they are changing things and making it a little bit more hitter friendly. And so I wonder if that does impact Bo Bichette's opposite field power. I'm going to bring this up on the computer real quickly. I think this is kind of crazy. This is Bo Bichette's spray chart. And I think that's nuts, right? Like, it's just the whole spray chart is he hits the ball everywhere is the point. But he's my number 4. I think that even if you look at his swing, you think that he's out of control. You don't really, it's hard to really pinpoint or understand his approach other than he's such a free swinger. He hits the ball on the ground. Last year it was 48.7% of the time. Yet I think you can count on him for 20 home runs and double-digit steals. And in that lineup, hitting high in that lineup, it also means 90 to 100 runs. So he's right there with the rest of them. I just think that because he doesn't walk a lot and because he has such a free swinging approach, I do think that there's the potential for him to ebb and flow year to year. And so because of that, I don't think he's quite as consistent as some of the players, a couple of like Turner and Lindor above him for me. All right. Number 5.
We're moving on down here. We skipped my number 2.
Oh, we did. My bad.
Yeah.
It's on me.
So we talked about Trey, who was alone in the first tier, $44. And then I have 3 players in my second tier, all from $32 to $34. And that was Seager, Bichette, and Witt. We talked about Witt and Bichette. One interesting thing I wanted to mention about Kansas City, and you mentioned about their approach. I guess I'm really interested to see they have someone, forgive me, I don't remember his name. I don't have that kind of recall with names, but I know he's from the Tampa Bay coaching tree, if I'm not mistaken. I know in the mid 2010s, you know, Kansas City was a really like high swing, high contact running team. I don't really know their identity, and I'm really curious to see how much of what Tampa does do they bring. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just sure I'm less sure than you are of like what is their identity. You know what I mean? They just had a managerial change. They've been trying to build with pitching for so long. So I'm really curious to see like what is their style of play. You know, how are they led? You know, and so I'm really interested to see it. I truly am. Yeah. So Seager for 2 at me. So for me, and anyone who listens to the pod, I think I'm not one to necessarily pipe for guys I roster, and I think they could easily be colored this way. But when I looked at this position, it's not really deep for power. And I think ranking Seager at second, why here in the community at large is he's downgraded because he doesn't steal, and that's 100% accurate. But I think I didn't see another player that had his blend of contact and power across the position. You have to go down to Tatis and Willie Adames to find guys who are projected to have an ISO over 200. And there were only 6 players at the position in total that had ISO projection over 185. So, and Seager has the same contact rates, as Bichette, so he doesn't run around with his hair hanging out of his hat, and he doesn't play a 40 grade shortstop and have all the flash of Bichette, but he has all the contact skills of a Bichette. And he brings better contact, more power. And again, I just didn't see a profile in terms of that quality. And so, yes, you're giving up speed. But I think what you might be missing, or if you didn't look closer, is you're missing an opportunity to really gain an advantage at the position over the vast majority of the other members of the league. So yeah, he was my number 2. Not necessarily for other reason, just I think his profile is unique, and I think I see an opportunity there to maybe get an edge. So I have him for 27 home runs, 78 runs, and 87 RBIs. Last year he was 80 percentile on barrel rate, 84 percentile on hard hit. And so, yeah, I think a lot of him as a hitter, this is not really about the shift limitations. It's just more, again, I think his profile is really unique at this position. And some people might see that as a disadvantage because the thing that's missing is the speed.
Right.
But he was still a $30 player on this projection without that. So that's the reason why he's my number 2. And I guess I'll leave it to you.
I have him at 8 because of the lack of speed. I think that, if specifically in Roto, if you have a 0 speed at short, I think it's the same argument as you made about power, right? So you've got an edge in power. I would argue that it might not even be an edge because I think Witt's going to catch him power-wise. But speed, right, is they're equal categories. And so if you're competing with someone who has 20 to 30 steals, even 15 steals at shortstop, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball in that one category, which for me is why having double-digit both home runs and stolen bases is almost a must, I think, to compete. I love Seager as a player. As a major league player, I hated that he went to the Rangers because I really enjoyed watching him with the Dodgers, and I'm a Mariners fan, so it was rough to see him go there. I agree. His quality of contact is great. I love the fact that he's really balanced ground ball, fly ball. I do think he could potentially benefit a bit from the shift rules, like you alluded to. All the batted ball metrics are in line, but he also had almost a 14% swinging strike rate. And that for me is a bit alarming. I also have seen his average shift let me bring him up real quick. I believe his launch has changed over time, if I'm not mistaken, and that has been coincided with a dip in his average as well. But let me confirm that real quickly here. It'll take me 2 seconds. Yeah, his launch was 13.6 last year. Previous years it was 11.9 and 10.7. He did have a 14.3 launch in 19. And his average has gone from, he hit in the 300s in 16, 17, 295, dipped in 18 at 267, 19, 272, and then back to 300, over 320 and 21. I would prefer to see a player who tried to make more contact and tried to hit less home runs, right? And I think his profile for me would elevate if he actually stopped trying to hit so many home runs and just tried to get on base. I have Correa at 5. I see them as both as incredibly skilled players. I have Correa there, even with the 0 steals, because I just think he's a more balanced hitter, right? Because with Seager, if he was to repeat his batting average and hits last year, you're taking a hit in both of those in both steals and batting average, right? 2 of the 5 categories. Again, not knocking him. He's still a starting shortstop in fantasy. I think he's a top, he's an upper half starting shortstop in fantasy. He's still a tier 2. And I think within tier 2 for me, there's not a whole lot of difference as you get below Bichette. So it's not to knock Seager at all. It's just to say that there are characteristics of his profile that don't pencil for me. And again, I don't know that his power is quite as unique as you do. I think Adames is a similar player to Seager. I have Adames at 10. He had 31 home runs. Seager last year had 33. Adames had 8 steals. Seager had 3. They're both low average players. So, but that said, I think that it would not surprise me if Corey Seager hit 290 and had 25, 30 home runs, at which point now you're talking about probably the top of tier 2 or the bottom of tier 1 for me. But I still love Seager as a player, even though he's a Ranger. Who's next?
Yeah, so my third tier is a fairly large group. I have Simeon at 5, and then Lindor at 6, Bogarts at 7, and then Wander Franco and Correa at 8 and 9, and I'll stop there.
Okay. The top one, you said Simeon?
Yeah.
Okay. I did not have him as a shortstop. Let's talk about Simeon real quick.
Yeah, so we talked about him as second base, I believe, quite a bit. We had him as I think we both had him as our number 1. Again, balanced profile, power and speed, tons of accumulated counting stats, batting average a little bit lower. But as you mentioned, in a head-to-head league, which my rankings are looking at Roto, but that accumulation, he might come up with just as many hits as someone who hits for a better average because of that. But yeah, I just saw him as a 26 home runs, 16 steals, which is a slew of counting stats. So it puts him right there with Lindor, who I have at 23 home runs and 13 steals. Both of them projected to hit, right around the same batting average. Lindor, I also really like, but his power is just a little bit less than Simeon's demonstrated.
And who was next?
Then I have getting into some lower speed players who are just really good hitters, Bogarts, Franco, and Correa.
Let's talk about Wander Franco. I want to love him. I have him at 7. 8. I want to love him. His quality of contact, as we all know, is freaking incredible. But he hasn't been healthy yet, and we really haven't seen the power. Do you think it's coming? Do you think that the contract he signed was justified? Are you excited to see what he does next year? Or do you think that he's going to continue to be hurt?
I am excited to see what he does. I don't remember. I know that he extended. Forgive me. I don't remember the nature of the contract. But yeah, I am excited to see what he does. I do think if he stays healthy, he is 20. That can't be right. My spreadsheet says he's 21. That can't be right.
He is 21. Last year was his age 21, or I believe his age 21 season.
You're kidding me. Okay. Wow. I thought that was wrong.
I think he started at 19 or 20. Yeah, he'll be 22 on March 1st.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see what he can do. As I have him projected for a 151 ISO, obviously that, and for fantasy, that's going to really weigh him down. We all know what he is in terms of his, I think he was a 80 on a hit tool, was his grade coming out as a prospect. So, all the plate skills and the contacts there. I think his sprint speed I have him the 83rd percentile on home to first. So he's exceptionally quick down the line. I think since that portends maybe to at least in his early 20s some nice speed. But I think until we see more power, it's hard to push him higher on a list like this. But if we do see any growth there, his launch angle last year was 8.2 degrees. But I think he's a talented enough hitter. If he wants to hit for more power, it's definitely in there, right?
I think the worry with him is, and this is such an interesting, I'm kind of working on or processing how to view hitters that make such incredible contact, because I think the fact that he had a 94.2% zone contact rate last year, which is insane, right? Hand-eye coordination, as you alluded to, the 80 hit tool. But I believe that drives his average EV down, right? And the quality of contact that he makes goes down. I'd love to see him take more pitches and strike out looking more often, right? Look for to really hunt the pitch that he's looking for, because he doesn't miss it. If he swings the bat, he's not missing the ball. So maybe he shrinks his strike zone, his personal strike zone, to something very small and just waits to get that pitch. Because I think where he's headed right now, with the 7.6% walk rate and a 9.6% K rate last year, which of course is in limited time, but even in 21, in 308 plate appearances, he has 7.8% walk rate and a 12% K rate. I think if he was more selective and he was trying to drive the ball, I think he reaches that potential that we think that he can. I'm kind of splitting the difference, ranking him at 8. I think that he's 8 and Seager's 9. I have him above Seager. No, I don't have him above Seager. I have him at 9 and Seager at 8, excuse me. I just think he's a bit of a wild card, but you can gamble on the hit tool, right? And I think the steals will be there. He had 8 steals last year in 344 plate appearances. So he could probably get to double-digit steals. It's just a question of power with him. Let me see. I want to find that contract real quick because I found it fascinating that the Rays gave it to him. It was 11 years, $182 million. So he signed through the 2032 season at an AAV of $16.5 million. They gave that to him as a 20-year-old. It's wild. The players above him, I actually have Correa at 5, Xander at 6, and O'Neill Cruz at 7. Let's talk about those 3 real quick, maybe in order. Do you see much difference in the production between Correa and Bogaerts?
No, I really don't. I have Bogaerts $21 and Correa at 20.
And where do you have those?
And this whole cluster for me is between $21 and $24. So they're all basically the same at the end of the day. But no, I don't see them as being that different.
I think they're both, just as players, they're similar players. They both contribute very little in the steals department. They both will. I think Correa had lesser counting stats last year just because the team he was on. I anticipate the Twins offense being better. I anticipate him hitting for a little more power. They're both higher average players that you want just a little more power from, because they don't contribute a ton of speed. But their skills are, their hit tool, their power, they're really just incredibly valuable, skilled players. I don't think you lose having either of those 2 on your team. You just have to make up for that steals deficiency. But you get 4 of the 5 categories from both of them, and we can expect Bogaerts to probably increase his runs and RBIs this year playing on the Padres team. So that for me is a little bit of a boost, but I still like Correa just a little bit more from a skill standpoint. And then, like I said, I have O'Neill Cruz at 7. Have you studied him much, and what do you think of O'Neill Cruz?
Yeah, I mean, I have him number 10. Yeah, I mean, it's all about pitch selection, right? And him swinging at strikes, and he can get to so many pitches. We've all seen video of him hitting balls that are not strikes, for clear home runs. I mean, the power and the speed, it's pretty prodigious, right? It's just a question of, can he make more contact? Can he be more selective? Because the raw tools are there. So, I've Rob Beer Temple and Athletic suggested that he was going to lead off for the Pirates, which is really interesting. And yeah, I have him for 249 average, 23 home runs and 20 steals, which is pretty nice baseline if you can do that, because I think that's probably the floor if he shows any growth at all.
Right. I don't embrace the savant rankings as much as I did previously. I think it's been a little bit played out, but when you see the 91st percentile average exit, the 100th percentile max exit, and the 98 speed and the 96 barrel, that's a pretty cool combination. I have him
Well,
at
it's like
7.
confirmation of what you see with your eyes, right? If you watch
Right,
him play, you see that.
right. I have him at 7, just below Bogarts and Correa, but above Seager and Franco, excuse me. Similar argument that I made with Witt. I think if you look at his physicality on the field and you see that he had 361 plate appearances as a 23-year-old, and he hit 17 home runs and he stole 10 bags and he had 45 runs and 54 RBIs. Again, I see a lower average and a lower OBP, and I understand that the swing and miss is pretty nasty at times, but the counting stats are going to be there if he's given the opportunity to play. If he stays healthy, the counting stats are going to be wild. And I don't think he's the same talent as Witt, which is why I make the same argument with him, but he's down at 7 and Witt for me is at 1. But it is the same argument that they're young. They put up a ton of homers and steals. To me, the name of the game is power and speed in fantasy. And he's, again, I'm kind of splitting the difference here, but I don't think he's going to be necessarily an elite superstar. But I think even if he's a very, very good regular, he's so physical that fantasy wise, you're going to get home runs and you're going to get stolen bases from him. I love him. I think he's one of the most exciting players in Major League Baseball. I ranked him at 7. I could see him being an outfielder next year, right? I could also see him being in the top tier if he really does figure out some of the swing and miss and the pitch selectivity. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back with our the second half of our rankings. All right, Aaron, let's recap real quickly. You want to go through the players that you've covered so far in order?
Yeah, tier 1, Trey Turner. Tier 2, Seager, Bichette, Witt. Tier 3, Simeon, Lindor, Xander, Wander Franco, Correa, Cruz. And then my last 3 in this tier, which are, again, we're all within $3 of each other, for Tatis, Adames, and Swanson.
Mm-hmm. I did not put Tatis on here, but he is actually a can play shortstop this year. That was my bad. I put him at the bottom of the first tier for me, below Lindor at 4. If I did include him, do we want to talk about Tatis, or we all kind of know who Fernando Tatis is? Maybe talk a little bit about why he might not reach that peak that we have seen from him in the past. Why don't you go ahead and get started?
Sure. So I have him right now based on his projections at a $43 player. However, to me, when I look at that projection, that's based on a pre-shoulder injury, pre-wrist injury, 22-year-old, and his track record of production. So that's what projections do. They look back at what happened and they look at the age and they, apply aging curves and develop and all that. So I take that with a pretty severe sideways look, because he had major shoulder surgery and wrist surgery,
Right.
and he hasn't played a baseball game. He's immensely talented, and you can't dismiss the possibility that he won't miss a beat and that he'll be the exact player he was, albeit with two IL stints built into his schedule with his suspension already.
Right.
That's why I have him at 11. Have him for 120 games. Even with that, again, based on the skills he showed, for 35 home runs and 21 steals. So he would be in the top tier, even at 120 games. But I am not certain, just because it's the human body. I'm not sure if he will be the exactly same player that he was pre 2 surgeries.
Right.
And I think from a fantasy redraft 2023, I think you have to think pretty seriously about drafting someone who has built in, is going to miss 20 games right off the top, and someone who has struggled to stay healthy when he's has been playing. So I think you have to account for that when you evaluate him for this year only.
Yep. I agree. I do think typically I don't really take into account the off the field stuff, right? It's not, but I think with him, there's been so much of it that you have to kind of question, is he going to be, even if healthy, is he going to be on the field all the time? That's question two. Question one to me is, you break your wrist as a hitter, right? There's a whole lot of questions you have to answer coming off of wrist surgery. If you're a hitter that hits for power, that I need to confirm that the power is 100% back before putting him back up at the top of the rankings, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many mixed signals. I mean, he was supposedly almost ready to come back before the suspension was announced.
Right.
And then I read recently that he just started swinging in early January.
Right. And
And so,
you're
yeah,
talking about a
it's
player
just
who,
been,
I think when, he's run really low contact rates, right? And his swinging strike in 19 was 15.6, and his swinging strike in 21 was 16.7. So he's a player that is counting on incredibly hard contact when he hits the ball, right? Because he does swing and miss as much as he does. So if the explosion isn't quite there because of the surgery and because of the time off, and he's swinging and missing a ton again, he's 80% of what he was previously from a power standpoint. That still keeps him, for me, in the bottom of that first tier, but that's not the Fernando Tatis we thought we had in 20 and 21, right?
right.
But he's just a total wild card. I think that it's completely up in the air, and the range of outcomes for Tatis in 23 is anything from not getting back at all and striking out a ton and stealing some bases and being a complete disappointment to being, a 30-30 player in 120 games. But complete wild card. All right, who'd you have next?
So my last two in this tier were Adames and Swanson.
Uh-huh. I've got Adames at 12 and then Swanson at the top of the third tier. Willie Adames is interesting because we did not see him coming up with the Rays as a 30 home run hitter, right?
Right.
And yet last year with Milwaukee, he had 83 runs, 31 home runs, 98 RBIs, and 8 stolen bases. I think he had a phenomenal year despite the 238 average and the 298 OBP. You like this profile? Do you like Adames? Like, is he a player you think can start on a championship fantasy team at shortstop?
I think he hits with enough power, yes, that you can build have him on your team and have players around him that compensate for what he lacks in his profile. I think he does enough good things that you can count on him. I mean, I have him. There's only 3 players at the position with a projected ISO over 200, and he's one of them.
Yeah, he's become just a big old power player, right? And I think it's interesting because I think that's what, if you look at Milwaukee's lineup, that's what they've become. You got Yelich, the projected lineup on Roster Resource. You got Yelich up top, Adames second, Tellez, William Contreras, Jesse Winker, Luis Urias. All those guys are kind of all or nothing types, right? It's kind of fun. I expect him to do something similar to what he did last year. He's going to be 27 this season. I don't see any reason why he can't continue to hit for, between 25 and low 30s home runs. Launch angle 18.9, it's creeping up to a place where that average is going to continue to go down and down and down, right? That's a little bit scary if that increases anymore, but good player, right? Good power player. The other one is Swanson. I think Swanson is a fascinating player. I think the contract that he signed, or the lack of interest that he had on the market at what he wanted, confirms that Major League Baseball doesn't see a repeat of what he did last year. If he did, with 99 runs, 25 homers, 96 RBIs, and 18 steals, he certainly wouldn't be at the top of my third tier in the bottom of your second or the bottom of your third. What do you think he's going to do next year, given the change from St. Louis to Chicago, or from Atlanta to Chicago, and that he's going into his age 29 season?
I think I might regress the power a little bit, and I think the Cubs with David Ross at manager have been a team that runs at a pretty high clip. So, and his demonstrated speed again with the tools that we have to evaluate that, you mesh that with his production in terms of running. I think would keep the speed where it is and maybe a tick up just based on team context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not a profile in terms of a plate profile I love, with 25% K rate and a sub 10% walk rate. But when he does make contact, he has demonstrated that he makes some powerful contact and runs enough and has been a volume play as we've talked about in the past.
Right.
He's available.
Right.
He posts every day.
Right.
So yeah, definitely a downgrade from Atlanta to Chicago. But I think again with the way the Cubs have run, that you're going to continue to see decent speed from him, and he's going to post volume. But I don't think his bat is special enough to push him up any higher
Right.
than where I have him.
So like as you alluded to, the thing to like about him is he plays every day, right? From 17 through 22, so without the 2020 COVID year, the fewest plate appearances he had were 533, right? So he's going to play, he's going to put up runs, he's going to put up some RBIs depending on where he hits. You talked about the walk rate and the K rate. I don't like either of those either that much. Here's what's interesting to me about him, about Dansby Swanson. The years that he runs a very high BABIP, he looks like a top tier shortstop, right? He looks like a very, very, very good shortstop. Last year's BABIP was 348. He hit 277. In 20, his BABIP was 350. He hit 274. In 145 plate appearances, his rookie year in 16, his BABIP was 383. He hit 302. The other years, right? So in 21, hold on here. In 21, his BABIP was 297. He hit 248, right? In 18, his BABIP was 290. He hit 238. And in 17, his BABIP was 292. He hit 232. So he's a player whose average is going to very much reflect kind of his luck of the batted balls in play. And to me, is that a player you really truly want to value? Because you don't know whether he's going to be getting lucky this year or not, right? You will probably get double-digit home runs and double-digit steals. In fact, I think you can bank on that. And you can bank on some runs and RBIs too, just because he's going to play a ton. But if you're expecting last year where he had a 348 BABIP, I don't think that's going to happen, especially in a park like Chicago. Chicago is, I don't know what the park BABIP is relative to other parks, but it's not a big park, right? Right field is pretty big, but it's not a big park. And the wind is such that it can push the ball, keep the ball in the park quite a bit. I don't see him repeating last year. I think we're lucky if he gets to 85% of what he did last year. To me, he's more of a 18 home runs, 75 runs, 75 RBIs, and 10 steals, right? And he could bring your average down potentially as well. That's why he is my number 13. Where do you have Tim?
That's where I have him as well. We have Adames and Swanson both at 12 and 13. That's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Especially with Adames, because I feel like I've converted you.
You have, actually. What also has converted me is the 31 home runs, but it is what it is.
We win some, we lose some.
That's right. I have Tim Anderson at 11. Where do you have him?
14.
Okay.
For me, him, it's just about like his availability. I have him projected for 131 games. I looked up his playing time. He's last 3 full seasons he's played 123, and 79 games. Mm-hmm. But he has really transformed himself into a high batting average hitter. Someone who's going to run. I think he's someone with his style of play, with the rule shifts. I really could see him, if he's on the field, taking advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And really pushing his stolen bases. But yeah, I just wonder about the durability and availability, given he has yet to play a full season in 4 years. Mm-hmm. But I like him as a player for at batting average and speed.
Mm-hmm. And he's had decent power in the past, right? Um, he's had double-digit home runs every year, including the COVID year, every year since 17 until last year. And I agree. I think he's fast and he's aggressive, and I think those are the types of players we're going to see an uptick in stolen bases. I so wish he walked more, because he could take advantage of that speed quite a bit more. But I think that the what's clear, the White Sox are just kind of letting him do Tim Anderson essentially. But if you remember, the way we talked about him, or the way a lot of folks talked about him heading into last year, he was at the top of this tier 2, right? He was coupled with Bogarts and Correa and Seager and Lindor. They were all really bunched up. And so if we do get a full season from Anderson, I think there's a lot of good. The one thing with him is because he hits at the top of that lineup, he does not, and the bottom of that lineup is so shitty. You're looking at 50, 60 RBIs, at which point you have to start making up for that number at a different position. So that gives me a bit of pause with him. But I still love Tim Anderson. I love Tim Anderson as a ball player, right?
Yes.
Fun player. All right. 14 was that Tim Anderson for you?
Yeah. So starting my last tier was Tim Anderson.
Okay.
At 14, and then at 15 I have Andres Gimenez, and at 16 I have Jeremy Pena, and then
Okay.
in the running was Ben Rosario, Tommy Edman, Nico Horner, and Ezekiel Tovar.
Okay. At 14 I have Tommy Edman. We talked about Edman on the second base episode.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go into that much more. At 15 I have Javi Baez. I don't know, man. That's basically just a bet on Baez is more talented than what he did last year. I think he was so out of control last year and just kind of frustrated and just playing like a wild man, right? His O swing was 48.7%, which is nuts. His zone contact was just above 80. We talked a little bit about that being okay if you're an elite hitter, of which he may not be anymore. But everything else went down, right? 17 home runs versus in 21 he had 31, 9 steals versus in 21 he had 18. But he is only going to be 30 years old this season, or 30 years old this season. So fences are coming in a bit. Fences are being lowered in Detroit, which could mean any number of things, right? I think we know what kind of player he is. He's a 5% walk rate, 25 to 30% K rate, free swinging guy who hits the ball hard when he hits it and can run and hit for power. To me, if I had a choice, like down in this area, I'm going to take Javi Baez just because we've seen it from him in the past, and I think that he's got enough pride that he's going to try to show everyone that he's still a great player, right? And then in this tier, I also have Ahmed Rosario at 16. He's not going to kill you at any stat. He's going to kind of keep you afloat at the position. Last year had 86 runs, 11 homers, 71 RBIs, and 18 steals. I think that's a pretty solid contribution from him. He hits the ball on the ground a ton, 52.5% ground ball rate. But I think for someone like Rosario, who can connect for power, but is not a power hitter per se, I love seeing him hit the ball on the ground and get on base. I think that Cleveland has struck gold with him in some ways. There is the potential. I think this is his last year before free agency. So I think there is some talk about Rosario maybe being traded at some point. That's something to keep an eye on. I think that he benefits from being in that Cleveland lineup. He's a free agent in 24, excuse me, but they've talked about him getting traded. I have Jeremy Pena down here at 17. I know we did the top 16. I've got him at 17. There are just some concerns. 3.9% walk rate versus a 24.2% K rate is pretty ugly. On base percentage below 290 is also pretty ugly. He's going to give you power and speed, but I'm going to wait on him until I see a little bit more discipline at the plate to actually invest. I also think he was a player that we didn't expect a ton from heading into last season, and there was a lot of hype about him in the first half. So that how we evaluated him going into last season might actually be who Pena is based on some of these metrics here.
Yeah.
And then I just have a quick shout out to CJ Abrams at 18. Just we talked about him in the past too, but he's another guy who could be an absolute jackpot. You could hit the jackpot with him if he does realize the power and speed in the way that we think he can. Are there any other? Do you want to talk about any of your other rankings?
No, I don't think so. We talked about Jimenez in detail on the second base pod. I have him as my 15th shortstop. And then Pena, yeah, I think, he's a power medium speed who's going to volume his way in a really productive offense. I have a lot of concerns about the plate profile overall, but he barreled the ball very well in his rookie year. And again, his glove is excellent, and I just expect him to volume his way into good counting stats, despite a plate profile that I'm not a fan of, which is why he's at 16.
Right.
I appreciate what you said about Rosario, Edman. We talked about Horner at second base. So, and I also appreciate what you said about Baez, because he's someone I question whether I should have higher. And honestly, like you, would be someone I would be interested in getting as like my backup second or short player. On the off chance that he gets his feet under him again, because I don't think the talent is gone. It is a tough park, and it was a transition, and he's an emotional player. So he's not someone that I would count out, but I also would be really hesitant to make him as my starter, which is why he was outside my 16. But someone I did think about is, should I be pushing him up more based on his track record?
And then if you play corner and middle infield, right, if that's a spot to fill, he's one that I would want, maybe not be my starting middle infielder, but maybe pair him with someone who's like incredibly milquetoast, right? That can give you a floor that's like almost acceptable, and you're gambling on Baez, but you don't have to play Baez in that place, right? I just hate to see it. I lived in Chicago for a couple of years and I followed the Cubs because my grandparents grew up there, and he was an icon, right? Javi Baez was everyone's favorite Cub. It really wasn't Rizzo. It wasn't Bryant. People loved Rizzo and Bryant, right? They had their fans, but Baez was the dude. And to see him go from that to basically oblivion in Detroit was a little bit sad for me. I'm certainly rooting for him. Do a little dynasty talk real quick.
Yeah, we should. Real quick, I want to circle back to Seager, and I apologize for belaboring this because I don't really know sometimes what I bring to the pod other than being a sounding board for you. But I think if I do bring anything of value, it's my ability to like look at data and numbers, because I think you have much more of an innate ability to draw on players' skills and make those kinds of assessments. And you're able to project forward beyond what's on the page. But I think, again, if I think I bring anything of value, it's just in a more data-driven kind of analysis. And I think I'm trying to improve my ability to assess players, and I'm also trying to broaden my analysis beyond getting fixated on yes or no black and white stats as well, and like understand that there's nuance in there. There's no one stat, right, that tells the entire story on a player. Even if someone is maybe underperforming in a stat that you think or I find value in, it doesn't make them a bad player.
Right.
So I just wanted to add some color again to why I put Seager at second. I think when looking again at the scope of this position, there were only 6 players that had a demonstrated ISO over 185. So that's not that many. There were only 5 players projected to have an OPS over 775. So looking at the landscape of the position, and I see that scarcity of ISO, scarcity of OPS, that to me is, we have a lot of quality players in that 750 range. We have a lot of quality players who are really good, well-rounded players who are going to get you 10 to 15 steals. So what I saw scarcity of was premium, like power and contact. And so when I look at some of the things with Seager that really popped to me, that really, it was this blend of all that made me push him to second. You know, go by weak contact, he was number one. He made less weak contact than anyone at the position. When I looked at his strikeout rate, he was at 16%. So you have to go all the way down to Wander Franco, who's one of the best hitting prospects we've seen, to have find someone in the top 15 who had a lower strikeout rate. His walk rate, 10%. Again, you have to go all the way down. Correa has a 10% walk rate. There's not that many guys at this position who are walking at that level. And then you go over to something like, again, ISO and OPS. You take out Tatis, who, again, we talked about as kind of a mystery box player.
Sure.
He would have the number one ISO outside of Tatis and the number one OPS outside of Tatis. So again, as I go across multiple categories, his name just kept coming up as the top option. And again, if you go down to his like contact and plate approach and walk rates, you have to go down to players like Tommy Edman or Ahmed Rosario to find players who make as much contact as he does. And then those players don't nearly bring the power at the position. And again, as I looked at the scope of the position, power and ISO and OPS seem to be the things that were in the least supply. And what Seager lacks is the speed. And there were only 4 players who were projected to be 2020. We have Trey and Witt, and then we have Cruz and Tatis. Cruz and Tatis are both, you know, kind of more mystery box players, super high ceiling players, whereas Turner and Witt, I think, are safer. But again, I just wanted to share a little bit. I didn't want to belabor. I'm not trying to win the argument, because I think I feel like you made a really sound argument as to why he belongs at number 8. And I didn't feel like I did a very good job explaining why I kept seeing reasons with his skills at this position that I think made him a little bit unique going into 2023. So thanks for giving me some room to do that.
Yeah, well
I
said.
don't know whether it adds value or not, but
No,
thank you.
absolutely does. Well, first of all, I think that's silly, right? I think we do this together, and we're saying it within the pod, but we do this together. And I think what is valuable to the listener and valuable to me is that we do come at it very, very differently from very different perspectives. One of the things I actually want to dig into just for a second, if we can, for the listeners, is we take very different approaches to these player rankings, right? You have a set of projections, correct me if I'm wrong, that are a combination of a couple public projection systems.
I use
to kind of aid you.
Yeah, I don't want to be transparent. I'll be transparent. So I use ATC, which is an aggregator to look at playing time. It's kind of a wisdom of the crowds projection. And then I use the BAT-X to do skills based per plate appearance per batted ball event projections based off the playing time of ATC.
Right.
The reason I like ATC is because, again, it's an aggregator, so you're getting more data built into it. And then I use the BAT-X for skills-based projections because that system incorporates savant batted ball data, which I find I want that in my projections.
So what I have on my spreadsheet is essentially every stat that I could want from the player's previous year, right? And so when I look at that, there's a ton of context that I've already learned or absorbed that I'm adding to the numbers that I'm looking at from the previous season. For the pod, I'll bring each player we talk about, I'll bring their Fangraphs page up to give me the historical data of that player. But I'm focusing on what they did last year, in large part because I think my knowledge is at a place where I know the injuries, the context, the team context, the developmental context of that player to kind of inherently weave into the numbers that I'm looking at. Here's what I'll say though, and this is why I don't use projection systems in the same way you do, is that projection systems don't account for, in my opinion, they do not account for elite talent. What I mean by that is, I don't remember the last time I saw a projection system take an early or a mid or up to about 24-year-old player who's become a superstar at that age and accurately predict that superstar year, right? So projection systems are good, I think, for helping you build the core of your, or the meat of your team, right? The support players. It's really good at figuring out what is Dansby Swanson's 2023 going to look like, right? Because there's a bunch of data to work off of. They can see the ups and downs. They can kind of put them in the middle. That's great. I think that's super valuable. But I'm sorry, Bobby Witt Jr., Wander Franco, O'Neal Cruz, Julio Rodriguez last year, you're not finding their true season on a projection system. You're just not. They're too conservative, and they can't see that Bobby Witt Jr. is an elite talent. They can't see, the projection system can't see that Julio Rodriguez is going 30-30. It just can't, right? And it never does. It didn't with Acuna, it didn't with Julio, it didn't with Witt. And so for me, when I make my rankings, I don't give a shit what it says about those players. I really don't. That's where I trust my eyes. That's when I look at, what did they do last season? Wow, Witt was 20-30 last season. That's dope. Let me pull up a bunch of his at-bats online, and let me see what happened when he hit the ball too much in the air, right? Is that something that is he the kind of athlete that I think can correct that, right? Is he the type of player that I think can start to hit the ball a little bit more line drive? Absolutely, I do, right? So it's not to put the projection system down. I think that's just the flaw for me. And so I can't cite the projection system in that same way. Again, I think it's super effective for a player with a lot of history. I really do. I think that anybody who looks at Dansby Swanson and thinks he's going to do what he did last year, all they need to do is look at the projection to understand he's not, right? Projection is great for Adames. It's great for Tim Anderson. It's great for Seager. It's great for Bogarts. It's great for Correa. It's not great for O'Neal Cruz, because we can't predict what O'Neal Cruz is going to do. You got to look at his talent. You got to look at his swing, right? So I get frustrated, not with you, but the projection systems in general, because I don't see the value. I see the value for like 90% of the players we talk about, but there's the 10% that I think gets you over the top, that it doesn't necessarily compute for me. Sorry to go off on a rant. Again, I think that that's what makes the pod great, is that we have the difference in opinion, and that we rank players so differently, and that we look at it, we come at it from such a different perspective, right? It's also, maybe we should do a pod on what stats we truly value. What are the stats that we are looking at, the group of stats that we are looking at. I don't have ISO on my spreadsheet. I've got everything from O-swing to zone contact to EV to barrel to hard hit, line drive, ground ball, fly ball, pull, central, oppo. I don't have ISO. I know what ISO is, but I don't know if that's a true measure for me to understand who that player is, right? I will typically I'll look at something else other than ISO, I guess, is what I'll say. Doesn't make it a bad stat. It's just not a stat that I particularly use. All right,
prospects.
Yeah, let's do it. So dynasty. I don't have a lot of changes. I've got the same top three: Witt, Turner, Lindor. I'm taking Tatis off the dynasty list. I don't think he's a shortstop long term. I also took O'Neal Cruz off the dynasty list because I don't think he's a shortstop long term. I think he's a right fielder or a center fielder. So I have Witt, Turner, Lindor. I have Anthony Volpe at 4. I don't think Anthony Volpe is going to be an elite superstar real life. I think he's going to be a superstar fantasy wise, right? I think that we're pretty much in agreement at this point that 2020 is his absolute floor, and 30-30 is well within range for him. So he's at 4. He's my number 1 shortstop. I've got Wander Franco at 5. I think he figures it out. I've got Bichette at 6. Marcelo Mayer at 7. Mayer's interesting because he doesn't add any speed. This is where we start getting into those lack of speed players who have the potential to hit 300 with 30 home runs. Correa at 8, Seager at 9. The only real reason to put Correa over Seager in Dynasty is just that he's a year younger. I've got Jackson Merrill, the shortstop prospect for the Padres, at 10. He could be as high as 5 by the end of this season. Jackson Merrill we'll talk about it on the Monos pod, but he's got the potential to be the number 1 prospect midseason this year. He's that good. He's also one of those guys. It's like if he elevates the ball a little more, he's going to be a superstar. Tim Anderson at 12. I think his skill set is going to continue to be great. He's the kind of athlete that I think his speed continues. Abrams at 13. I didn't put Bogarts in here. My bad. Bogarts would be right next to Seager and Correa. Abrams, Adames, Swanson, Baez at the bottom. I left off Edman, I left off Pena, and I left off Rosario. No Lawler, no Mason Wynn. Those guys are going to be a bit further down for me. No Royce Lewis. And then Edwin Arroyo, Zach Neto, Brooks Lee, I have as a third baseman, Ezekiel Tovar. Those are all below the guys that I just mentioned. You have any thoughts or comments on the list or on those prospects?
I do. For Volpe, I'm curious, as you know him so well. I was looking at his ground ball rates, and I really love his swinging strike rate and his contact rates in the minors. I was curious. I know that you've talked about like your ideal mix being 40-40. I also know he's demonstrated ability to take a walk really, really consistently. So do you see him more as like an OBP asset than a batting average asset? Or
Yes.
do you think there's,
Yes.
I'm just curious as you know him so well.
His swing is geared to hit home runs. He reworked his swing over COVID, and he was kind of seen as a decent prospect, but not a great prospect. Coming out of COVID, he was in better shape, and he also really started to build launch into his swing. So he's got a ton of that Simeon, Justin Turner stuff going on, right? Where the launch angle allows him to get out in front of the ball and pull it to left field. The issue with him is going to be that in reworking his swing, he gave up some average and some base hits. So I expect him to hover in like the 250, 260, 270 range. He's not a 280 to 300 hitter in the way that he reworked his swing, but it's why he has 30, 35 home run potential at 5'11", 180 is the swing that he's built in. He also put up 50 steals last year, or in 21, excuse me. So he had a 20 homer, 50 steal season that year. And last year, 21 home runs and 50 steals last year. So, and he's about a 60 speed, maybe a 65 speed if you're pushing it, but a 60 speed guy that had 50 steals, a lot of it is and I hate to say skill, but he's a skilled player and a skilled base runner. But yeah, I think he's high OBP, power, speed, expect a bit of a lower average, but as we've said, as long as you don't tank the average, if you're 250 on up, it's acceptable with those other stats from him. He's fun.
Looking over the players that you mentioned and that you shared with me and doing prep, it's really young. I was just Meyer 19, Merrill 19, Lawler 19, Arroyo 18, Nito's 21, but and just sort of discuss him. I think Lawler for me is one that when I watch his swing and stuff that really speaks to me. He had a 4-level season last year, and didn't he get hurt as well? Yeah. But he's end of the year in Double-A. I'm interested to see if they start him back there, and if he's fully recovered. I'm surprised and disappointed to hear you be so high on Jackson Merrill, just because he is someone who's available in our home league. But I was surprised genuinely when you said that you put him at number 10. just looking at his grades and also like his ground ball rate, and I really like his swing. Um, he performed really well at the AFL. I watched quite a bit of him.
Mhm.
Um, and I loved his batted ball is albeit a really small sample this year because he had an injury. His swing strike rate was exceptionally low, and his contact rates were exceptionally high.
Mhm.
Albeit he hit the ground on the ball, he hit the ball on the ground a ton.
Mhm.
But I didn't think he had like a power speed ceiling that would get you that excited. So I was surprised to hear you say that. I don't know if you want to add to him anything else. Having him at number 10 was just a surprise for me.
No, I think he's one of those 60 hit, 60 power, 55 speed shortstops that either the hit or the power, I think, has more upside than 60.
Hmm.
And as you alluded to, and I said earlier, the thing that he does, or the thing that he needs to do better, is not hit the ball on the ground so much, but that's something that can be taught. And he's a very teachable player at 19, putting up those sorts of numbers. Do you want to come right back and discuss a little more? Or are we done here?
We can come back. We have
Cool.
a few more minutes
Let's
for
come back in
sure.
just a second. Any other prospects we want to hit on? We talked about Merrill, talked a little about Marcelo, Volpe, Jackson Holiday. I have on this list as well. I guess he's the only other prospect. He was the number one pick of the Baltimore Orioles last season. Matt Holiday's son, going to stay at shortstop. Really pretty swing. So he's got that 2020 feel to him as well. Great player. I think he's going to be a major leaguer sooner than we think. Again, he's at 11, just below Jackson Merrill, because while I think Holiday offers a little more speed, I think Merrill has the better hit tool and also has the better power projection for me.
Hmm.
Anything you want to add on Holiday?
No, no, I don't. I don't. No.
Any other shortstops for you to bring up, prospects or otherwise?
Mason Wynn is one that I'm interested to see if he starts in Double A again. I assume that he would this year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's a player that you and I have both had on our roster this offseason. Um, he's a player I like a lot just because his track record of being a pitcher, um, and just as you said, well, to me, he's just became a hitter full time, so he's still raw, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but just the raw tools that are there, and I'm just really impressed by his bat speed, um, and the film that I've watched of him and his approach this year. Also, I like he was hitting the ball all directions as well. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm interested to see how he develops in 2023 if he continues to ascend and show more pop in the bat for fantasy and gets more refined in the field. So he's kind of one that I'm very interested in and I like a lot.
His bat is lightning quick,
Yeah.
legit lightning quick. I love his bat. I think he's got 2020 in him. He's got Edmund in front of him right now, but um Edmund's not a shortstop. I think he's getting by at short for them. And Wynn is very much the heir apparent. There's nobody in their system really that's going to block him from basically as soon as he can develop into a major league shortstop, he will be their starting shortstop. Um, I do wonder where he hits in the lineup initially, right? You might not see him actually realize his fantasy potential until he's a little bit older, because they'll probably bat him eighth or ninth for a while. But Mason Wynn is a stud. I love him. I think he's a lot of fun to watch, and just
Yeah.
a dynamite player. Uh,
It's cool.
I guess we should talk real quickly about Ezekiel Tovar. Um, I don't love him as a prospect. He's probably going to be the starting shortstop in Colorado. If it's not at the beginning of the season, it'll be midseason. He's been a top 20 prospect on a lot of lists. Um, Not my absolute favorite player, but I think he's going to hit for a good average in Colorado, and he'll probably top out for me in that tier 2 area with some of the bigger name shortstops, but never really ascend to a tier 1 shortstop for me. You in the same boat there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it seems like hit and glove, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
but a
Yeah,
lot of
I'm
fun.
not. hmm
Cool. Any other shortstops?
I don't think so.
Any strategic thoughts on shortstops and redraft given the pool?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really deep, but I think again, I only saw four guys who were 2020 players, and I think um to me, I would love to start there if I could. Because I think it'd give you just a really just an advantage and a nice start to your roster.
Mm-hmm. I think
I,
there
I would
are.
not
Go ahead.
I would not want to be down in the Rosario, Edmund, Tovar's someone we just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
someone who just giving me average and speed. I don't I would want some power as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not top of the position power.
Right. Well, I think there are 12 players at short for me that are acceptable shortstops, right? There are some that excite me more than others. There are some that might crash and burn, and there's some that you can absolutely count on their production, right? An O'Neill Cruz versus a Xander Bogaerts sort of thing. You
Yeah,
might, in fact, have the opportunity to choose between the two. Um, but they all are, I think, acceptable heading into the season, right? Uh,
right.
you could even make the argument for Swanson and Edmund if you want to build your team that way. If you get them at the right price, that they're also, okay shortstops. I guess the point for me is just that they're very, very deep. And your argument was very sound. I think, although I disagree with the player choice, I think the argument is very sound that if you can find a player that you think differentiates themselves from the others at this position, they could be very, very valuable next year. But
Yeah, it
when
just doesn't seem I don't feel a lot of pressure to take one. You know what I mean? I just don't see a drop off until you get 11 or 12 and then you know what I mean?
right, well, it's interesting.
I
Like as
know.
much as I love Witt, and I think Witt is carries a first round value in a 15 team redraft league. I wouldn't take him there because I think that the position has enough depth that I would want to go elsewhere with my pick. Even though I think he will carry first round value in the same way that Turner does. Um, again, I would just wait, and I would fill holes elsewhere where I think there's less depth. It was actually very refreshing to do shortstop versus some of the other positions because it is so deep.
Yeah.
Anything else?
It's I'll kind of veer into an open forum since we're talking about
Yeah,
strategy a little bit.
yeah, let's do it.
And we were talking a little bit about our different approaches. And I wanted to get your opinion because I think I know your answer, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. So personally, I've heard a lot of people talk about ADP when they're talking about their rankings.
Mhm.
And I'll answer for myself, like I don't care. Like that is meaningless to me when I'm trying to evaluate these players. To me, ADP is something when you go into a draft, to know if we're going into draft with your evaluations and how you view the player pool, you can have some sense of where their tiers and things like that. But like it doesn't matter to me. So when I hear someone say like I'm gonna move them down in my ranks because I can still get them based on ADP, like I think that's insane. Like, what do you think?
ADP can be a tool, yes, to help you guess where a player is going to go, which can also be a dangerous game, right? If some player's ADP is 60 and you're picking at, say 45, and you really love that player, and your evaluation is of that player is that he's the 45th best player, but you wait because you think you can get him at 60 because that's what his ADP says. That's not a game I'm interested in, right? And I think that's what you're alluding to. Yes, I think there's strategy in understanding ADP because it's a tool that other people use. Outside of that, I'm building my team based on what I think based on my own evaluation of each and every player. And if I believe this player is the right player for me to take at this time, I'm taking him. I don't care what other people do. I also think that there's so much, how do I say it? I think people naturally follow other people. I think that, and the same thing goes in fantasy baseball, right? If somebody pumps up a player, that player all of a sudden their ADP starts to increase, right? We saw Matt Mervis at the beginning of redraft season go through the roof. And then they signed Trey Mancini, right? Everyone thought Matt Mervis was going to be great. And clearly the Cubs just went out and signed another first baseman. People get on these bandwagons and they go and they go and they go and they go. And I wonder I do wonder at times how much people actually are basing what they say on what other people are saying versus
Right.
their own evaluation. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And to me, like, this is like what we're doing. And I'll give it to you because rankings like made me very uncomfortable. But going into the second year, like I basically incorporate them into evaluating the player pool. So when we have a discussion, it's just pulling up my sheet I've been working on, you know what I mean?
Right.
And going through it and thinking through like projections and then skills and then where are there overlaps. But yeah, to my point, to my gist of my question was like ADP does not matter to me. Like it is, to me, you're wasting your time. There's just, to Mervis is a great example. Between now and March 15th, depth charts are going to change. People are going to get hurt. People are going to get signed. And I just think ranking players based on the order they're being drafted right now is just a really odd way to look at the player pool. But playing in a hybrid keeper league and only really being in one league outside of that, a TGFBI draft, I don't do a lot of drafting. So that's why I wanted your opinion of like, am I missing something? Because I see it as a fool's errand.
No, I think it's, again, the value is in understanding and being able to, within reason, anticipate what other people are doing. Outside of that, no. Like, I would say not everybody has the time to do it. I would say go do your own evaluations, do your own player ranks, use your own, as we do, like we talked about, use your own tools, figure out what stats resonate with you, what stats prove to have some value to you, right? Go watch that player if you have time. Go understand who that player is if you have time. I think get to a place where you are like, Matt and I have this conversation sometimes that, I'll listen to another pod, but I'm listening to another pod for entertainment, right? I'm not listening, and I'll learn some things about players. I certainly, I think you can learn something from everyone, but I'm not taking it as gospel in the way that maybe I did in the past. I think that we have done enough work on our own to create our own systems and our own rankings that those things don't matter as much anymore, right? And that's a really fun and liberating place to be. So, it adds to your point about ADP. ADP is what, basically it's like, do you listen to James Anderson or do you listen to, whoever, right? And come up with your own shit. Come up with your own rankings. That, to me, that's
it's like if we're all in the same fishbowl and we're all drafting on the same ADP list and we're all valuing the same players at the same spots, we're all competing for the same players at the same times.
Right.
Like there's no.
I think Dylan Cease was the perfect example. We went after Dylan Cease really high in last year's TGFBI draft, right? And people were pumping him up by the time the draft came along, but he was a player we had targeted months back because of the research we did. And we picked him and we reaped the rewards of picking him that high, right? So I think that if you can get one or two of those guys on your team where you rank them differently and you value them differently, and you might be 30 picks above ADP, but if that player is who you think that player is, you just, you can win a league. You can literally win a league by finding a player like that. They can have that kind of impact. Yeah, there's my ADP answer.
I appreciate what you said about podcasts too. I've decreased my podcast intake. And I think when I listen to something, I have a few shows that I listen to and I have my notebook out because they'll talk about stats or things that like, hey, I'm going to write this down. Like I'm listening to open my mind, to be exposed to different ideas, to be thinking about ways of thinking. And there are other shows where I'm putting this on so I have something to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's all it is.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Their opinions or like, it doesn't matter. It's just, they're talking about baseball. I like baseball. it's comforting.
Yep.
And then there are other things like I'm just not going to listen to.
Right.
I'm not going to listen to 4 hours of 5 different people's view on the prospect pool because
Totally.
it just becomes noise and I can't hear my own voice anymore. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, yeah, I've really kind of cut down and like I make an intentional choice of yeah, I'm listening to consume and learn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then I cut down a lot of stuff just because again, you just if you keep intaking and taking, you can't hear your own voice. At
Right.
least I can't
Right.
anymore. So I
100%.
appreciate what you said about that.
Right on. Right on.
Okay.
I ain't got nothing else.
All right, friend.
I'm good. Well,
All right.
I'll check right back with you after I end this.
All right.
Cool.
Be well.